Good afternoon and welcome to our February 24th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district and today are located on the Tecumseh territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumseh and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. I want to welcome Kurt Christofferson and Sadie Hunter, both present as alternates, Mr. Christofferson for Director Brown and Sadie for Director Bass. The library is pleased to announce its second all-day staff conference on February the 28th. This virtual conference will feature sessions on intellectual freedom, Indigenous awareness training, readers advisory, and a kaleidoscope of sessions, including internship projects on social work in libraries and marketing. To support staff participation, Kamloops libraries will be closed. Excuse me. I have been asked to tell you that director's expense checks are available for you at reception. There's been a bit of a glitch there since Katie Soltis has been injured and is working from home. We want to announce upcoming meetings and events. On the March the 9th, there's a meeting of the Audit Committee. On March the 9th, there's a Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Management Committee meeting. March the 10th, Electoral Area Directors Committee. March 10th, regular board meeting. March 23rd, Policy Review Committee. March 24th, Hospital Board Budget Meeting. And March 25th, regular board meeting to deal with our budget. Today in your blue folders, you will find any mail personally addressed to you. And I think that's all, other than mine contains some census statistics, which I think are going to be brought forward later on today's agenda. Are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Hearing none, we have minutes. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Delegations. Invited presentations. We have first the Fraser Basin Council and BGC Engineering with Mr. Simpson, Mike Simpson, whom you know well, and Chris Holm from BGC presenting the Flood Hazard Assessment Project in the TNRD. So I think we could begin with Mr. Simpson.
Great. Thanks, Chair Gillis. Mr. Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you okay. I was to caution you that we have a heavy agenda, so the 10 minutes will be it won't be extended by much, I can promise you, Mike. Okay.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments will be very brief just to start, and then I'll turn it over to Chris to deliver the bulk of the presentation. Good afternoon, directors, staff, and guests. I'm pleased to be part of this presentation just to give you an update on and to answer some specific questions that we understand that came up around flood mapping and development decisions. So just to introduce, it's been about 4 years. 4 years ago, many of you were part of our inaugural meeting where we initiated some coordination about flood mapping, flood risk assessment throughout the Thompson River watershed, not just the TNRD. And we've done that for a number of reasons. One was to take advantage of the funding available. Secondly, to take advantage of the economies of scale, to do it in a coordinated fashion, on behalf of all the municipalities, regional districts, First Nations within the Thompson River watershed. And thirdly, which I think is the nature of the matter today, is to fill in the gaps and to take advantage of newer technologies and the current situation around flood mapping. And so by doing so, being able to have better details about flood maps and flood risks and where they are, because we know that there was a lot of gaps before. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Chris Holm to give the presentation.
Thank you, Mike, and directors. Appreciate the opportunities to share about some of our work here. Please let me know. Can you see my screen? Okay, I've just shared my screen.
Yeah, we see it now.
Okay, perfect. As Mike has touched on, a number of different local governments and Fraser Basin Council have been advancing integrated studies of natural hazards with a particular focus on flood-related hazards across very large areas of British Columbia over the last several years. And one of the outcomes of this has been the preparation of flood hazard maps. The reason, as I understand it, that we have been requested to provide a presentation today is to offer up a summary of the types of maps that are generated by this work and provide some comments on their intended use, because there are a number of different types of maps that support a number of different types of decisions. And it is very important to marry the appropriate decision-making to the appropriate maps in terms of a level of detail of mapping that can support the kinds of decisions that are being made. Now, flood studies in general take time, and they occur over a progression that typically starts with a collection of data and information at a broad regional scale, and often a rather screening level of detail. And then over time, it progresses through the collection of additional types of information, both on the hydrology and the floods, the topographies, such as the collection of LiDAR data, which supports analysis, the preparation of maps, which ultimately lead to further risk assessment and mitigation planning down the way. Now, as we step through this process, there is essentially an exponential increase in the level of effort that's needed as you get to higher and higher levels of detail. And for that reason, it's important to prioritize. And it's also important to provide maps that are, well, a little less detailed, can be cost effectively deployed over very large regions and delivered early as a stepping stone towards more detailed mapping in the highest priority areas. And so with Fraser Basin Council, that has been the approach that has been taken here. And it is also a useful approach in the sense that each subsequent step can build on the previous and take advantage of the funding sources which may be made available to advance down those various steps of risk management. We can speak to three major levels of detail, which we would refer to as flood hazard identification mapping, which is really to understand where are the hazards at a more regional scale. An intermediate step of base level, as it's called, floodplain mapping, which is a desktop analysis that really does bring in analysis of hydrology and understanding the river systems and a variety of different numerical modeling techniques that are used to prepare these maps. And finally, detailed floodplain maps, which require additional on-the-ground survey work and are at a level of detail that's suitable for more prescriptive use in regulation. I'm going to take folks here through each of these levels of detail and provide a number of comments on their intended use. Now, the first, flood hazard identification maps. The purpose of this type of work, and you can see on the screen here a map that shows floodplains mapped for the entirety of the district. It is to identify where are the flood hazards, the potential flood hazards, if your major objective is simply to identify where they might be, and then perhaps think about the assets that might be located in those areas. It's intended to indicate areas for further study and to prioritize. It's a flag that one needs to pay attention to these areas, but it's not intended to prescribe decisions. One would not, for example, build a flood construction level from this level of detail of mapping. At a next stage of level of detail, and for example, in the arc of work within the Thompson-Nicola, the identification of floodplain mapping everywhere led to base level flood hazard mapping across about 15 different areas. And at this point, we are preparing maps that inform understanding of flood hazard for fairly specific scenarios. What does the 200-year flood look like in terms of its extent, for example, or characteristics such as its velocities or depths? This type of map is still quite cost effective to prepare at a base level of detail over quite large areas. And the key word here is that it is to inform. So a qualified professional might take this information, and if they were tasked with a site-specific assessment, bring it with additional information to support, for example, a safe for the use intended type assessment for a building lot. Importantly, they do not include freeboard, so there's no allowance for uncertainty, and they are aiming to understand characteristics of flood hazard for a particular scenario. Now, as we take things further then, you can build off base level flood hazard maps to think across multiple flood scenarios from the 20, the 50, the 200, perhaps even a 500-year flood event. So you see across a range of scenarios, and you build those scenario maps at a greater level of detail. You also would, at this point, be able to prepare flood construction level maps, which are suitable for use in, for example, bylaws, where it can then be used prescriptively to identify elevations, building elevations that might be required as a condition of a building or a development permit, rather. So for qualified professionals, these inform assessments of flood hazard and risk. And for decision makers, this level of detail can additionally include maps that are suitable for use in policy and bylaws. Now, those are the main points. And I just want to reiterate before I close for any questions. If you compare the flood construction level maps, which are a policy instrument, for example, to a flood hazard scenario map, which would inform, both are based on particular magnitudes of events. Flood construction level maps specify a flood elevation. They include some measure of freeboard, an added elevation that's typically to account for uncertainties. An important other detail is that a flood construction level map does not assume that flood protection structures perform as intended. Typically, they're made by assuming that the dike, if there is one, breaches and the waters run through it. Whereas for a flood hazard scenario map, they're based on the conditions at the site as they are at the time of preparation for these maps. They don't add freeboard, and they assume generally that the structural flood protection will work as intended, unless you're specifically asking a question such as what happens if the dike breaches. Those are differences. And the main point, the real key is that hazard scenarios inform. Flood construction level maps can help prescribe in decision making. I'm going to stop there. Those are the main differences between these different maps, and I can take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Okay, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for being here today. I guess, one of the reasons why I was really interested to hear your presentation before some of the items we have on the agenda today was just the experience in Merritt where, the river that was not expected to flood was the one that flooded, and the uncertainty around, what's happening around that. So I guess the first question is around uncertainty. And then a second question would be, do we have across the Wheel District, or which parts of the Wheel District have the kind of mapping that would allow us to actually figure out what to put in a bylaw for floodplains? Okay,
thank you for that. I'll start with the second part of that question and then move to the first part of the question. The current work, which we are undertaking right now, is to advance the base level floodplain maps to a level of detail that would be considered detailed floodplain maps, and does include flood construction levels for 13 areas within the Thompson-Nicola, plus 2 Steep Creek hazard areas that are outside of the Thompson-Nicola in the Columbia-Shuswap Regional District. And this is for Fraser Basin Council on behalf of the regional district. So that is coming and is expected to be prepared this year. As for uncertainty, you're certainly right that it is very important to acknowledge that we are in a changing climate and there are uncertainties. And what occurred on the Coldwater River was a real lesson in that. The flows were higher than would have previously been estimated, and there is much work going on within the scientific community to better understand that. And one addresses uncertainties by adopting some degree of conservatism, or further and more detailed assessment are the two most common approaches. And that is something that is going to continue to need to be revisited over the coming years. The main message is that really gone are the days of one relying on a historical floodplain map for years or even decades. These maps will be prepared. They will take care, maintenance, and regular updates to continue to be current for land use and development decisions.
Just one last thing, on the 15 areas that you will have that level of detail for our regional district, how are they chosen? Are they sort of like, is there some sort of methodology behind how they were actually figured out, or does it cover a substantial area of the region, most areas with rivers, for example?
That's a very good question, and it's an important one because of the resources that are required to do this type of mapping. When this work started in 2018 with Fraser Basin Council, the initial objectives were just that, to take a look across the entirety of the district, identify the hazards, do a comprehensive inventory of the assets, develop a process to prioritize areas based on risk, so that there was in place an objective and reasonably transparent approach to decide what areas should be considered the highest priority to advance for more detailed study. So the subsequent work leading to these detailed floodplain maps has been based on the results of that previous work that have demonstrated that these are the highest risk priority areas to advance to detailed study.
Thank you, Director Rice.
Mute. I'm going to unmute. And thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Flood mapping, a huge thing right now, and going to be very useful as we move forward. But before we go today, I'd really like to extend this. This is probably going to be Mike Simpson's last appearance before our board as the manager for Fraser Basin, the regional Fraser Basin, and it's going to be a tough shoes to fill with Mike, when you leave, and we're going to miss you. And this guy's been a champion of, steering collaboration and cooperation among different parties and different entities. One of the most difficult jobs, probably next to being the communications director for DFO, maybe one of the toughest jobs in the world. But anyways, he's done an incredible job, and wading through the steelhead waters, right on through the foresty trees and all that kind of things. That projects he's been involved in has been just monumental, in my opinion, and he's done a hell of a job. He's a knowledge keeper of many areas and stuff, but he's going to pursue his passion in forestry, and I wish him all the luck in that arena. And thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Director Rice. And I think the rest of the board wishes him all the good luck in that direction as well. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, could you give me this definition of freeboard?
Freeboard, yes. First, I'll say that the measure of freeboard is not consistently defined in British Columbia, although there are commonly applied levels of freeboard ranging from 0.3 to 0.6 meters above an estimated flood elevation. It has not been consistently applied, but
I'm sorry to break in, but do I assume it's a measure?
It is
a measure?
That is correct. Freeboard is a measure of uncertainty. So it's to take a flood elevation, acknowledge that there are uncertainties associated with that, and add a degree of conservatism. And so the typical would be, for example, to add 0.6 meters above a specified flood elevation, the most common being the estimated 200-year flood. It's important too to recognize that as you go up, you also go out. And so a map that includes freeboard will be a higher elevation, but then you need to interpolate that out to the valley floors on either side. So the width of flooding will be wider once you've added a height also. And both are considered in the preparation of a flood construction level map.
Mr. Chair, just one more question. And so would that pertain to when we are looking at building on what would have been a floodplain, how high they have to put that piece of property before it's at flood, before it's below floodplain?
That is correct. So a flood construction level map is aiming to provide elevations that are unlikely to flood for the magnitude of floods that are shown on that map. It doesn't mean that extreme flood that's even bigger won't flood that area. For example, if you had a much higher flood than the recurrence interval that was used to prepare the FCL map, then that's a different story. But that's where some of the conservatism would also come in. So the two pieces there are a freeboard, and also how confident one is in the flood protection, the dikes, and typically for this sort of map, one just assumes that they will not provide such protection for the purposes of making these maps.
Thank you, Alternate Director Christopherson.
Thank you, Mike and Chris. Really good information, but I'm coming from a town that was devastated. And I'm just wondering, with the information that is being provided, and so is it going to be out soon enough for us to be able to make decisions on where to rebuild, what we shouldn't, where we shouldn't rebuild? We've got a lot of people that are asking those questions right now, trying to say, I don't know whether my house, if it can be rebuilt, should be rebuilt. And the city is, of course, is looking at, where do you establish places that residential development can happen again? Where do we put the dikes? Where do we have the setback dikes so that you've got some room for the river to grow? We've got people that are still living in Kamloops and Kelowna and Salmon Arm that have nothing to come back to, and they're asking questions. When can we come back? But where can we come back and rebuild, or do we have to look at rebuilding some other place?
Yeah, and certainly would like to acknowledge how very difficult that is for all the different individuals involved there. There's several steps, and maybe one can organize that into 3 steps. There's taking stock of what exists there now, and that work is going on.
Yeah.
There is to update the understanding around the floods themselves to improve the forecasts of the types of floods that can occur in the future. There's then the use of that information by the teams that are involved in the recovery effort to make decisions about the level of protection that should be afforded, where it needs to be structural flood protection, and design accordingly. And then with those assumptions in place, remake, update the maps accordingly. And so that requires surveys to understand what's going on the ground, bathymetric surveys of the rivers, and then an update of the current flood hazard mapping. The good thing is that this doesn't mean that you need to completely redo all the work that has been done up until this point. It needs to be updated with the different conditions that exist there now. And then out the other side will be maps. I can't give you a sense of the schedule for that because it depends on too many factors that we don't know at this point. But I would expect that will be unfolding over the coming months.
You think it'll be within talking months, not years?
I would say that must depend on the resources that are afforded to recovery efforts in that area, and that it's going to depend hugely on the level of resources that are available to the city. But from a technical perspective, which is the perspective that I can speak to, given sufficient resources, it would certainly be over that time schedule and not years.
Okay, basically, I just want to know if there's any hope that we can give people some direction of if and when they can even wonder about rebuilding. And the sooner that we can have that information, the sooner we can say, no, don't build here, yes, build here. And time is of the essence.
It certainly is. And I think as a starting point for that, it would certainly be possible at this point to lay out a clear set of steps that one needs to go through in order to understand the risks, put in place the decision criteria that are needed to make objective and transparent decisions about how to manage those risks, and then what will unfold from those decisions. And those two pieces are very, very important. There's the technical scientific part that qualified professionals are working on. And then there's the contributions from folks like yourselves to develop the decision criteria that are needed, for example, to address questions such as what is safe enough? What risks can we tolerate, given that there's no such thing as no risk? Facing those questions head on and coming up with an objective way to address them is very much part of the process, whether we're talking about an area that's been devastated by the recent floods or a proposed development in a different area. And they do need to come together. And this would be an opportunity to think about that, given that in the coming short period, there are going to be flood hazard maps delivered to the district that will require evaluations such as that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. I see no further hands and no hands up, so I will thank you ever so much for your presentation. It's timely, and the work you're doing is vital to, as Director Christopherson pointed out, it's vital to a lot of people. So thanks once again for your presentation, and good luck in your future endeavors, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
That takes us to, I'm sorry, Director Rothenberger.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. As much as I'm fond of my table mates here. We're a bit crowded today. Would you mind if I switch into one of the empty chairs? That'll be all right. I want to move.
I have no objection, but I expect there will be disappointed people to your left and your right, but go ahead.
No offense.
Brings us to item 5.2, building infraction stop work order, 790 Main Street, Blue River 2, Inc. There is an opportunity for the owner to make representation. Ms. Campbell, is there anybody here on behalf of Blue River 2 Incorporated?
There is not.
Have there been any written materials we should have received?
No, there have not.
Thank you. Building infraction resort type property with several non-compliant buildings. So the building permits 8225 Locan Bear Creek Road. Ms. Campbell, is there anyone wishing to speak to that matter here today?
No, there is not.
Thank you. And building infraction, construction of several non-compliant buildings, 115 Highway 97, the Psalm 23 Transition Society. Ms. Campbell, is there anybody wishing to speak to that building infraction matter?
Yes, Chair, there is Mr. Marvin DeClaire is here to address the board. Ms. Adokova is just going to get him and bring him in.
Okay, is he being invited in? Good. Thank you. Please state your name clearly. You will be afforded up to 10 minutes, and then there may be questions from board members following your presentation.
Okay, thank you. My name is Marvin DeClaire. I'm the Executive Director of Psalm 23 Transition Society. I'm not here to dispute what's on the table here as far as working with and the deficiencies that have happened over the years. I am here to be able to work with and have with David and Tony to be able to look at solutions. A couple of things when I was reading this, I just don't want to get a wrong image with Psalm 23, with some of the literature of having 40 clients reside in 2021. We work on a very limited budget, and in 2020, we had 19 people enter our program, and no more than 5 at that time that would be in the home at the same time. 2021 was 28 entered, no more than 5, and this year we have had 2 enter, and we currently have 3 men in the program. The basis of that other stuff was taken from a visionary tour that was written in 2013 about what we saw what the future would be as far as buildings and such. As of today, with what's on the agenda, I saw some of the recommendations. Part of our goal, I was talking with Regina on the phone, and part of the goals that we had set in plan for this year was to have all the siding completed on all of the buildings, and also I have 3 pages of deficiencies, which would be included in, I'm looking at most of them, if not all of them, before we could get into having Tony and David come for the inspections for finals and such like that. The realistic plan, it says of 2022, I would like to ask for the extension actually till 2033 because we are, 23, sorry. Yeah, okay, I'm a procrastinator. But with looking at that is because we know that there's going to be some other things, and we want to be able to have that timeline to be able to come up and to comply with everything that we have to do there as a society. The other avenue that was on the list was about placing something on the title. I personally don't have a problem with that. The only problem I would like to put forward is Psalm 23, when we took over that property, we took over a mortgage where we could not get any mortgage from a bank because they didn't want any property outside of some, of where it'd be sellable, I guess. So we had 3 years of just being on a interest only mortgage. And then that got moved into a private lender at 8%. The board of directors right now has somebody in place that when our, this July, when our mortgage comes up for renewal, we have someone in place who's looking at doing something for us between 3 and 4%. So I would look at if we could delay that until after we get that, that'd be wonderful. So that something isn't on there. But yeah, I'm here to comply. That's not an issue on that. I have talking to Tony and talking to David. David has opened my eyes to things because Psalm 23 has in the past, unfortunately, been taken advantage of, where we had contractors on 2 of these buildings, which I have all the paperwork of them supposed to be supplying drawings, permits, and those things. And those things didn't happen. So I'm not here to set up any excuses, but I do want to reply with just asking for a recommendation to 2023 to extend for all the work to be completed. A lot of it will be done this year. And as long as we don't, last year we ran into having to evacuate all our staff and students for over a month because of the wildfires. And then we had, unfortunately, to follow COVID restrictions where we couldn't even allow people on the property and to get work done. So we probably lost about 4 months worth of what we could have been able to do. So in hindsight, this is what we're sort of asking the board, and just to be able to see if we can have this leniency. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask, does anyone have questions for this presenter? Obviously, Director Schaefer does.
Could you explain to me where this is?
Your mic on, Director
It's
Schaefer?
17 kilometers north of Clinton, right on Highway 97. Yes, in the middle of nowhere.
Thank you, Director Roden.
Thank you. You're asking for an extension through 2023. Would you be looking at all of 2023 or would say June of 2023 be a target? I'm just trying to get some idea of the timeline.
Sure. I would be looking at more of before the snow comes, so fall of 2023.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for this presenter? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much for appearing before us. We will be dealing with the matter shortly.
Thank you very much. God bless.
That takes us to unfinished business. 6.1, the building infraction for 790 Main Street, Blue River. I see a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? I see no one opposed. That's carried. 6.2, building infraction 8225 Locan Bear Creek Road. There is a recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And building infraction 115 Highway 97, there are two recommendations. Did you wish to speak to this matter at all, Ms. Sadilkova, before we vote on it?
Extending the second recommendation to October of 2023 is acceptable to staff as long as they're moving in the right direction instead of building more buildings without permits. So I think we've caught their attention, so that would be fine. The issue about the mortgage is a difficult one because notices on titles such as a section 57 or liens and things tend to sit benignly on title until a property conveys or is up for borrowing for a mortgage. So that's really a decision of the board. Could we, it's end of February. That would be a 5-month reprieve for to enable them to get refinancing. So that's a bigger ask and that's a board decision.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Director Watson? Microphone?
I move that we give Psalm 23 a reprieve of 5 months before a section 57 goes on.
That's the second part.
That's the second part.
There's two recommendations, Director Schaefer.
Yeah.
Is there, Ms. Campbell?
Thank you, Chair Gillis. No, I think that I just wanted to say that I think the reprieve of 5 months would pertain to the first recommendation, that the notice not be filed for 5 months. Is that my
Yes.
understanding, Director Watson? Okay.
So that's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Director Polderman?
He was asking for an extension to 2023. That's a 17-month extension, not a
Director
5 months extension.
No, Director Polderman, there's two recommendations. The first one is to file a notice under section pursuant to the authority of section 57. And that's the one on which he's hoping to put off until after they renegotiate their mortgage. The second one is the further legal action, which will be dealt with in terms of putting off to 2023, October 2023. So we're dealing so far only with the section 57. Is there any further discussion on that? Now, Director Schaefer.
Could you please tell me if we extend it 5 months, then we'll put the 57 on there? Or do we have to, or can we just extend it for the 23 or the 17 months?
that would be a record breaker. We've not, I think the longest we've ever extended it for is 6 months. And that notice does serve a purpose. It indemnifies us. And I don't want to get off track, but we have just finished dealing with a legal challenge. And thank goodness we had a notice on that title in a timely way. I'm not worried about 5 months, but I would certainly be worried about anything, closer to a year.
Thank you, Director Singh.
Just on the timeline, Mr. Staff, are there any life safety issues that we're dealing with here in terms of like could a building collapse the next 5 months? Like could be, again, I'll come back to this district for a liability issue?
So I personally haven't been to the property. However, the photos are attached to the report, and two or three of our inspectors and our bylaw enforcement officer were out. And according to Marvin, one of the buildings, which was a cloth building on a metal frame, had collapsed recently, wind, snow, what have you. We don't know what all the buildings are used for. There are some assembly use buildings, and those are, and the buildings where people sleep. Because it's not a house and it's an institution, it does have a higher threshold of code. The code is more stringent. However, I don't think there's any imminent risk in the next few months.
Thank you, Director Christian.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Through you to Director Watson. Is this the old Haven?
Yes, it is. It is a much new and improved Haven though.
Okay, thank you. And the use is one of assembly and overnight stay. I would caution the board in terms of the exposure that you could place the district under should something go wrong within the intervening time for this type of use. This would be a use that could likely lend itself to more what's the word I'm looking for, damage to the facilities. And I think that it's important that we would stick by our guns in terms of the compliance with the building code. And as Director Singh points out, for nothing more than the health and safety exposures.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 here, 9. I'm having trouble with the screen. I see Director Rice, Director. This is all in favor. Director O'Reilly, Director Swan, Director Hunter, yeah. And Director Sinclair. So Director Stamer as well. Do you have a count, Ms. Campbell?
No, I do not. I think we're gonna just need to poll directors because I think that this is gonna be a divided vote. So I'm gonna need to have the recording secretary be able to list who's voting contrary to the majority. So all those in favor, if you could just put your hands up and we'll try and do a count here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there's 11 at the table. And clearly enough on Zoom to carry the motion.
Can I just have those who are opposed so that because those are the
That might
votes that
be
we're
easier.
gonna need to record.
1, 2, 3,
So we've got,
4, 5,
Olivia, I'm gonna read it out for you.
6, 7. Pardon?
So Graham, Judy, Christian.
Sorry, Director Roden, can you use your, I can say it. I need Olivia to be able to hear.
Okay, everyone opposed? Okay, so Directors Duty, Graham, Christian, Quinn, Singh in the room. And you're opposed? And Gillis? And on the screen opposed, we have Rain. And that is all.
Thank you.
So the motion is carried and the application of the section 57 is deferred, as I understand the motion. Director Watson, for 5 months, correct? Okay, that takes us to recommendation number 2, which is the one under which he had asked to have the implementation of that extended until October of 2023.
Mr.
Director
Chairman,
Crowe.
I'd like to move the motion as it exists.
Excuse me. Director
I'm
Crowe.
moving number 2 exactly the way it's recommended.
I'm sorry, Director Elliott, number 2 is what?
As written.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much, that's automatic. It's before us right now as written.
Do
Okay,
you have a motion?
don't require a motion. You are moving, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood you. You're moving recommendation number 2? Okay, I'm sorry, Director Elliott. Thank you. Is it seconded? Moved and seconded, and discussion. Director Crowe, sorry, we finally got to you.
I'm opposed to leaving it as it is. I think that they're in a good line of work trying to help people with addictions, and I'd like to see that we grant that extension through to October of 2023.
Is that an amendment?
Yes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion respecting the amendment? Director Elliott?
Mr. Chairman, I think like Director Christian, we are putting ourselves in a liable position with the fact that these folks are just non-compliant. And we wouldn't do it with anybody else. So I'm really concerned about it. And I think if they go for the next 10 months, which brings them to the end of 2022, they've had enough time to get their act together.
Thank you. Director O'Reilly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be supporting the motion as amended. I think as Ms. Director Sedilteba said, we've caught their attention. They know we mean business, and as written in the report, it's a difficult situation, but this facility is serving a very positive purpose. And if they're working towards getting the facilities up to code, and as mentioned, that's now going up to commercial code through BC Building Code as it's an institution, that is going to take a lot more time than just getting a residence up to code. But as long as they're working towards that goal, I have no problem supporting the extension. As well, I don't think there has been a ton of contact with the applicant. As noticed, it's only been 3 times, I believe, in the last 2 years, a year and a half. And so I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Singh, Director Rice, Director Swan, and Director Quinn. Director Singh, please.
To go to the point of order or not, but I'm just wondering whether the amendment is so contrary to what the motion is that it's actually not an amendment to the motion. It's more of a defeat this motion and bring another one up. I'm just asking that question. You're obviously in the chair, but I just wanted to understand better how that process is working right now.
As I understand it, the amendment is simply to state that if the further legal action will follow if the construction of buildings are not brought into compliance by the end of 2023, as opposed to the way the original recommendation was written, which is 2022. I would assume that is simply an amendment.
I think you're right. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Director Singh, it was also just brought to my attention that it's, no, I thought Director, did you ask for October? I'm sorry. Okay, so it's just to October 2023. Is that the end of October 31st? October 31st, 2023, just so we've got it all clear what we're voting on here. Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. I will echo Director O'Reilly's. He captured pretty much of what I'm thinking too. So I will also be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Swan.
Thank you. Yes, I will be supporting the amendment because living in the area, I know how difficult it is to get qualified tradespeople right now. And in order to give time to get these buildings into compliance, it is going to take time. So I will be supporting the amendment.
Thanks, Director Swan. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Chairman. I was speaking against the motion. And the reason being is that we defeated motion number 1. And so now, if you leave this as it is, it gives him, certainly gives him a lot of encouragement to get to work on it. And you can always come back in October and ask for a further extension. Or if he doesn't do anything, then it's cut and dried. So I'll be speaking against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the amendment? Director Schaefer.
I would just like to know, why do we have to go to 2023? Can't we go to the end of 2022 or October 2022 and then have them come back and extend it there?
I suppose we could, but that's not what's before us. The amendment is before us is,
If they're, that's giving them a lot of time not to work on it.
I'm sorry?
It's giving the people a lot of time not to come into compliance.
Okay. Any further discussion? Director Roden.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a conflict. I had occasion to interview Mr. DeClaire for an article that I wrote about the Psalm 23 Society, which I have written about in the past. I know they do a lot of very good work. They do a lot of charity work, delivering firewood, for example, to people in the area. They do a lot of fundraising and catering, etc. So funding is very hard for them to come by, as it is for many small organizations. I suspect that when Mr. DeClaire says he needs some extra time, he is thinking about that fundraising aspect and the fact that dollars are very difficult to come by. They are undoubtedly doing very good work. But as with so many of the charitable organizations and local volunteer groups that we all depend on in our communities, they do not have a lot of money. So I suspect that that would be what would be standing in the way. I also believe, for what this is worth, Mr. DeClaire to be an honorable man. And if he says that they will work to be compliant as soon as possible, but would like that extra wiggle room, I am inclined personally to believe that he is an honorable man and will honor his words to us today.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4.
You need the names, Ms. Campbell?
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, Director Rice, Director Hunter, Talarico. That's, the amendment is carried.
Can we just get those who are opposed to the amendment so we can record those? Thank you.
Okay.
Opposed are Schaefer, Elliott, Graham, Singh, Quinn, Rice, I'm sorry, Christian, Holderman, and Director Rain. Okay? Oh, and I'm sorry, Director Christofferson.
Not Rice, though.
Not Rice. No, I straightened that out, Director Rice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it is carried. That takes us to floodplain exemption application FP 12, item number 6.4. There's a board report, an explanatory map. Sorry, Ms. Campbell.
Sorry, Chair Gillis. So the board just voted on the amendment. So now we need to vote on the motion as amended.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So just so everyone's clear, the motion.
So the motion as amended would read as written, except at the end, it would say by the end of October 2020, by the 31st October 2023, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so as amended, the motion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think at the table.
The names.
Uh,
Opposed, we have Elliott, Schaefer, Christian, Quinn, Holderman, Singh, Christofferson,
Yeah,
and Rain.
that's it. So it's carried. Oh, no, I love this. Item 6.4 then, floodplain exemption application number FP 12. You have a report. This is somewhat related to the Fraser Basin report. There is a recommendation.
Move to recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Is there any, I can tell you that Mr. Edwards is available for questions. He's not making a presentation here, but he's the engineer who's made this application. He will be available for questions. Is there discussion? Director Quinn?
Could you explain all subject to the registration of a restrictive covenant? What would that mean through the chair to director, manager of planning?
Ms. Zadokova?
Yeah, it would simply be a save harmless covenant.
That saves us
You
hardness.
save us harmless, and it would read, so in 1992, a covenant as part of this, I assume it was with the subdivision of the land, required a certain level. That was the level that was in our old zoning bylaw. Our new zoning bylaw of 2012 is the one that they're applying to exempt from.
So just for clarity on that, so essentially, we don't have the new data from the Fraser Basin Council sort of study on, it's been given to us yet. It will allow us to train, look at the new, if we do any new floodplain like sort of levels, but there's a save harmless for the real district so that the basically homeowner takes all the liability themselves and then obviously couldn't apply for various,
Yeah.
DFA, whatever assistance, that kind of thing, if the thing does flood. Is that correct?
The consultant, Mr. Edwards, relied upon the first stage of the Cambio mapping that was available, the one that Mr. Holmes spoke to. This is what we've done, and these are the next stages. And an image of it, if it's helpful, is attached on the second last page of this item in your agenda.
Just there's three levels, right? First, that's the overall regional, that's the second one, which is sort of like, not quite to the level of actually doing floodplains or changes. Where's this one?
I think it's the first level, the most broad.
Okay.
So it doesn't have the sort of policy making, the qualities to help make policy and determine exact floodplains, what they should be. So we use the ones in our zoning bylaw, but I'm not the geologist that he is. He had a word for it. It provides raw data. And it is interesting because on the second last page, this report is identical to the one that was in your January agenda. The differences there's a letter from the owner attached, and there was an answer. Director Stamer raised the question about funding, prevent DFA, disaster financial assistance, and when and how is that applied? So the answer to his question is on the last page, and the second last page looks kind of like that. We can see this online, but it shows you the sort of pixelation of the flood mapping extracted from the Cambio Community Flood Mapping website.
Right. So I read the report. I guess my key question is, if we approve this today, the district will save harmless from any liability from that decision.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Pardon? No, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And I see 10 at the table. 11, 12, 13, 14. It's carried. And who is opposed?
We have Elliott, Schaefer, Watson, Rothenberger.
Alderman.
Sorry, couldn't see there. Polderman,
Laird.
Laird, and no one on the screen.
Okay, thank you. As I say, it's carried. That takes us to another contentious matter, I guess, the Cherry Creek Savannah Official Community Plan Bylaw. There are 3 recommendations.
I will move number 1.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the first recommendation? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know, after all these years, I still do not know. If we read that the first and second time, does it go to public hearing at that point? Ms. Savannah?
So under the legislation, a public hearing can occur anytime between first and third reading. I find it's best to have it between second and third, because if there's any changes or any subject twos, those can be resolved between first and second. It's much harder to make changes after. It is possible, but it's much more limited what changes can be made after a public hearing. So we typically, if it gets first and second, then the third recommendation is that it be taken to a public hearing. So at that point, the sort of particulars of the public hearing can be debated and voted on.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I will move number 2.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on recommendation number 2? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? I see no one opposed. Number 2 is carried.
And Mr. Chairman, I would move number 3, but I would like to speak to it.
Number 3, moved, seconded by Director Polderman. Is there any discussion, Director Elliott?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a piece of land that is dividing the community at this point. There's a lot of difficult pieces to this, and if you've read that report, you'll see that the Buey Street, which is in actual fact a road allowance, has been used by the neighbors as a cul-de-sac and have cut that off. On the other hand, this is also part of a floodplain and runs along the lake and is part, it projects itself along by the park. And so if we go to public hearing, I would like to ask that we go to public hearing in Savannah.
Mr. Dokova?
I think that the only difference with the public hearing is whether it's in conjunction with a regular board of directors meeting or it's delegated. I think that's the intention of Director Elliott. However, I would look for the board to determine to whom it is delegated, so we know who takes charge of that.
Okay, so
Director Elliott, Ms. Campbell, does this have to proceed then as an amendment? Because the recommendation says in conjunction with a regular board of directors meeting. So I think that seems to me that would require an amendment, would it not?
Chair Gillis, if it's not contentious, it can be a friendly amendment that rather than it be taken in conjunction, occur in conjunction with the regular board of directors meeting, that it be delegated to Director Elliott and Director, it should likely be 2 directors that it gets delegated to, not just 1.
okay, then I would so move, I would put that little friendly amendment in. That it
So
be delegated.
Delegated to Director Elliott and to whom?
I'll attend.
Sorry?
Director O'Reilly.
Okay. So it would be delegated to Director O'Reilly and to Director Elliott, is that correct?
That'd be great.
Have I got it right? Ms. Campbell?
That's correct, Chair. Delegated to Director O'Reilly and Director Elliott.
Thank you. Director Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, traditionally in the past, we've always had 3 directors. That makes it much more comfortable public hearing, particularly if there's contentious issues. And so perhaps we should suggest somebody else as well as Director Elliott and Director O'Reilly, who's nearby.
Vice Chair Roden has said she would be willing to participate as well. But Fine, okay, so it'll be Director Riley, Director Elliott, and Vice Chair Roden. Is that okay, Ms. Sedilkova? Yeah, I got 2 thumbs up from Ms. Sedilkova. That's the first time that's ever happened. So with that change, Director Schaefer?
I'd like to ask a couple questions, like the property owners on either side had to bring it up to the flood level plain. Is this property owner going to have to do that as well? And also, is it correct that the berm at the end of Blue Road is going to be dismantled so a road can go through?
So first, on the one side, it is, three of these properties were a campground historically when Savannah Access Road was the Trans-Canada Highway. There is a retaining wall between, you look on the first page of the report, you see a manufactured home park and a bunch of RVs. There is a low retaining wall between those properties. It's not high enough to make the floodplain, but usually RVs parked on a property, they don't get a floodplain exemption because it's a vehicle. You could move the vehicle. In terms of on the other side, the house is a dark roofed house near the water. That house was significantly added onto and modified without a building permit. It is in the floodplain. And most importantly, its septic field is likely encroaching over our water line on the Buey Street right of way. And you can kind of see, it's not so much there. This is why I think it's contentious. If you look into the detailed image on the very last page before the maps, so it would be, there's no page numbers. There's a map showing the water lines. There's a map showing cars and vehicles parked and a landscaped hedge from one of the neighbors. That's so the Buey Street right of way, the last bit of it has been significantly modified by the adjoining owners. So yes, they've planted and parked things to block access to this property, but lawfully, even without a subdivision or rezoning, this property is to have lawful access to the end of Buey Street.
Thanks, Ms. Sedilkova. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 3? I'm seeing none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? I see no one opposed. That's carried. Takes us to bylaw 2758, zoning amendment bylaw for ALR residential flexibility changes. There are 2 recommendations. Moved and seconded. Recommendation number 1. Is there any discussion? Director Watson.
My mic is not on. In this bylaw, it's regarding additional houses on ALR land, right? What happens with the old rules where if you ceased farming, you had to take a house off the land?
Ms. Sedilkova.
Okay, so you didn't have to necessarily take the house off the land. There is a grandfathering provision. The 14-page fact sheet from the ALC is a lot more complicated. With the land area, and sometimes, you know, if a farmer or rancher has maybe health or other properties in the process of conveyance, when property has been farmed and then conveyed, it often loses class 9 and then regains it. No, we do not police that in that interim. The landowner has proved that it is farmable.
Thank you very much.
Is there any further discussion with Director Rice?
Thank you, Chair, and to Ms. Sedilkova. I've been trying to wade through the ALR stuff, as you can imagine, and I did have one question, if you could clarify it, just so I can wrap my head around it, the regulation changed in January of this year. And and I got my head around a lot of it actually, but the part that I would like to see about clarification is the section that reads on July 12, 2021, in order of council amended the ALR use regulation, BC Reg 30-2019, effective 2022. Qualifying the ALC does not generate regulations. These are handed down from the province, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture. Still, it remains ALC's responsibility to interpret and administer regulations and to interact with local government as per ALC recommendations. Local government can and should impose criteria restrictions for an additional dwelling. Does this mean the province has first say on this, or am I interpreting this wrong?
So no, you're not. Absolutely. The province has the first say on this, and the agriculture minister. Often the devil is in the details in the regulations, which are typically passed through an order in council. The act goes to the legislature. The folks at the ALC often remind us, staff, that they see it the same day that we see it, apparently. So when it becomes public or gets proposed as a bill, that's when they've seen it for the first time. They are asked for input before perhaps, but so were we on these rounds of changes. The ministry spent a year doing consultation, and we did staff did participate in these.
Follow up, please.
Go ahead, Director Rice.
On that note, then cannot, given the situation with the flooding and properties being gone, like the land itself being gone, and so these folks have to, and there's a handful in the regional district, not just in my area, there's a handful, not just in my area, and so it's extraordinary circumstances, probably never been addressed too much before, but could not you go directly to the province and look at some outside box solutions then to give these people some options besides just having a worthless piece of paper for their property and stuff, which is what they have right now?
So, I mean, that is what SILGA and UBCM really is the best venue. That's the formal venue for that process. It is drawing title to Crown land or to change bigger rules that have been in place for eons. Those making changes to those is harder and harder if you kind of follow where I'm making land for people that have lost their land due to tragedies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the first recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? Don't see anyone opposed. That's carried. That takes us to recommendation number 2. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded by Director Polderman. Is there any discussion on recommendation number 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? No one's opposed. It's carried. South Thompson Valley Pinnetan Official Community Plan, Bylaw 2767. There are 1, 2, a minute. Oh, there are 5 recommendations. Do I hear a motion to move the first one?
Just
Moved and
just a reminder to
seconded. Is there
please
any
use your
discussion?
mics. Just sorry to interrupt. If you could please use your mic so that those directors on Zoom can hear. Thank you.
Director Laird, could you use your mic so that?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, sorry, recommendation number 1, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? No one's opposed. That's carried. Recommendation number 2.
So moved.
Move to.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion with respect to recommendation number 2? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? No one's opposed. That's carried. Recommendation number 3, please.
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see no hands up. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Number 4.
Move for.
Second.
Number 4 is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And finally, recommendation number 5.
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? No hands are up. Then all in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. That takes us to development applications. A report from the General Manager of Development Services that you saw. There's a recommendation for refusal.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? See no one opposed, that's carried. Takes us to reports. And to begin with, we have a verbal update from our CAO, Mr. Hildebrand. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I've got 2 topics I want to talk about today. First one's got a small presentation I'm going to walk you through. That's on the renovation of the civic building here that we're in today. And then secondly is just a quick video verbal update that Mr. Ray is going to provide through via Zoom. So Dave, if I guess it's up and running. So I just wanted to give a bit of background on something that we talked about back in December of 2021. So back in April of 2021, the board were discussing options for the COVID-19 Safe Restart Funding Grant. And as part of that discussion, decided that a new boardroom was not necessary, and staff agreed with that. Alternatively, we reconfigured our current boardroom as you are all sitting in today and created more efficient space and a safe configuration and modernized the space. And it's been working very well. This room does not work, although it doesn't work very well for our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, for a variety of reasons. And in the past, would always displace the board and the committees during events. So this is one of the main drivers behind this change. In December of 2021, as I referred to earlier, the board unanimously approved the renovation to the civic building using the remaining funds from that needed to be allocated by the end of the year 2021. During that meeting, I didn't have the opportunity to take you through this presentation, and that's why I felt like it would be important to ensure the board was fully informed. So as a reminder, the COVID-19 Safe Restart Funds had a very specific eligibility requirements, and the board allocated funding for a variety of initiatives with this in mind. So emergency planning and response, as well as technology requirements, were eligible costs. This opportunity, along with the need for better utilization of our overall office space, was the key factors in moving forward with this project. To just as a reminder, here's the allocation for the COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant Funds. You can look down the total column, total allocated. We approved as a board IT updates, TNRD Fire Department, PPE and upgrades, electoral area funding, pooled economic development, other regional support, and then of course the one that was approved in December for the civic building and EOC renovations. So I'm going to walk you through this because I know it may be a bit confusing, but this is the 3rd floor layout of this building. And if you look at in the center on the top, that would be the entrance as you'd walk in on the 4th floor. It's the same on the 3rd floor. Within the red section down towards the left side is currently what is our library distribution system. And it's set up in a very, it's been there for a long time and it doesn't utilize space very well. And it's a very, the process just doesn't work and efficiency isn't working in that area. The library leadership team, so that would be our chief librarian and some of the management team, are also on this floor and not close to the library. it's a waste of space throughout that whole area, and I've been working closely with the library to relocate that, and I'll share that here in a moment. If you look now on the 4th floor, as you all see the boardroom there on the left, and as you walk in that front door, we have a staff right now, that staff members that are sharing cubicles. We have staff working in meeting rooms and non-office areas. We currently have Kevin and Joe working in a library 2nd floor meeting room. And we're constantly struggling for meeting room space, both for staff and for the board. So the plan is to renovate the space on that 2nd floor and move library administration and distribution from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. We're going to then renovate that vacated space on the 3rd floor to create additional office cubicles and a large meeting room that'll act as our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center space. This moves specific staff from the 4th floor to the 3rd floor for efficiency. This plan creates the necessary room for future growth, both on the 3rd and the 4th floor. It creates more of a safe, more efficient use of space throughout the entire building. And most importantly, provides a dedicated emergency operations center, which is a significant priority for the organization. And of course, will be used in the future. The pre-work has already started on this, and we hope to have this complete by the summer. So although it's not everyone can read these very well, but if you were to walk outside this room and look over the balcony down towards the library, you can see that balcony that's 2 floors down. That's where we are actually moving the library distribution space from floor 3 to the level 2. So we're able to do that in a much more efficient way in a much smaller footprint, and making sure we have the leadership team from the library as well as the library distribution team all working on the 1st and 2nd floor together with the library. And then the vacated space on floor 3, if you look in the center of that red box, the EOC is actually going to be right in the center, where Kevin Skrepnik and our operations team is actually going to be adjacent to there. And that'll be the new setup where it'll create space along both the north and the south walls with more cubicle space to build some capacity into the organization, so that we're not working so closely together and using offices and shared cubicles. So really the key points to this that I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of, and that's the critical need for an EOC space. And secondly, we're just physically running out of space for the future and currently, and a need for capacity. And then finally, just safe and efficient workspace for our entire team. So I just wanted to provide that to the board with a quick update, because it was overlooked at that December meeting and I wasn't able to give all those details. So if there's any questions around that, I would gladly take that.
Are there questions for Mr. Hildebrand with respect to the building changes? Director Rothenberger.
Sorry, could you remind us what the cost was for reconfiguring the boardroom? The space we're in here.
I would have to look back. I'm thinking, I believe it was around $30,000, but includes the furniture, the carpet and the paint. It was quite reasonable, actually.
And there's no further changes required for this room?
There's certainly changes coming to this room, and that's part of the IT technology allotment. And that's with changing out the microphones, the technology, and making it a more modern space for sound and for audio and video.
Are there any other questions for, Director Stamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Hildebrand. When we talked about public hearings and meetings, is there going to be any opportunities for anything with larger areas other than we have for the boardroom in case we have those scenarios, other than what we're doing on Zoom?
Absolutely. That new EOC space that we are working on right now would be a space that has an accordion wall in it that will allow to be a bigger space, similar to the size that we're in today. So we'll have that, as well as some of the other office spaces that staff are working in will be freed up again for meetings and for board committees and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Sorry, Director Hunter?
Thank you, Chair. I have a tangential, I guess, comment. I just wonder about showing a map or making a map public that shows the location and names of staff. That seems like a privacy breach. I just wanted to point that out. It could be an issue for some individuals to have their workplace and their exact location made public in that manner. So I just wanted to comment.
Mr.
Thank you.
Hildebrand?
Yeah, thank you for that. It was, this presentation wasn't made part of the agenda and it was just shown here quickly publicly, but yeah, good point. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Hildebrand, there's going to be a lot of moving around going on. Does that budget that we have include the furniture moving and or replacement?
It would be inclusive of that, and we're going to do that in stages because it really is a domino effect.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Mr. Hildebrand? I'm not seeing any, so that would take you to
Gillis?
the second part of your presentation, Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you. I'm just going to pass it over to Mr. Ray just for a quick verbal update on our BDO progress to date.
Okay, thank you, Board and Chair. So as you'll recall, we received the report from BDO in January. It was made public. Since then, we formed a working group to address those recommendations, consisting mainly of CAO Hildebrand, Corporate Officer Deanna Campbell, Amanda Ellison, the General Manager of People and Engagement, myself, Agnes Satt from our Legislative Services Department, and Debbie Lovin from our Finance Department. I think I've got everyone in that list. We met January 31st and reviewed the recommendations and began, for the most part in that meeting, assigning responsibility, who was going to work on what pieces of it, and taking action. I know that Ms. Ellison's been working steadily on policy development, areas around conflict of interest, training. She's begun doing employee exit interviews, which was one of the recommendations, addressing use of vacation banks and many more areas that sort of fit under a more or less an HR area of responsibility. Ms. Campbell's likewise been very active looking at policy development, review of the committees that we have, their makeup and in terms of reference, and following up on many of those. And then we've also met and started setting action items and deadlines on financial policy development and reporting improvements. So on the subject of reporting improvements, if I can quickly share my screen. Let's see. Does everyone see that that screen with it says forensic audit response and results at the top?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, so this is just a snapshot of a new page on the website that our communications team is currently working on. So that people visiting the website will be able to get sort of all in one place a sense of the progress we're making on the improvements that came out of those recommendations. So as you can see, this is sort of an introductory page. And for each of the recommendations, we'll have this sort of gas gauge type visual. And it'll break it down for each of the 65 recommendations in the report. You'll see a visual indication of the progress being made. So we've listed out, and this isn't comprehensive. It doesn't show all of them. It's still a work in progress. But you'll see it's the recommendations around the improvement, strengthening board oversight, strengthening oversight by TNRD audit committee. Implementing a fraud risk assessment, updating policies and bylaws. There are 65 recommendations in total. So this will be part of our communication to the public, where they can come and see on each recommendation where we're at. And so we'll have to have behind the scenes progress update where the different individuals working on different aspects can update where they're at in terms of timeline and the progress, so that we can update this on a regular basis. that's sort of what I was given as a snapshot for today. It's still very much a work in progress, but we believe we'll be in a position to go live with it sometime next month. And we just wanted to give the board a chance to see what we had in mind. I'm sure there'll be more to it than simply the visuals here, as well as regular progress updates to the board, generally on a monthly basis, starting with this one. So that's really what I had as an update. It's still at the beginning stages of trying to get the stuff off the ground. We've definitely started the work on it, and have been planning out timelines and deadlines to make sure that we don't lose momentum, that we in fact pick up momentum. And that's really all I had to say. If there's any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Ray? Director Singh?
Not a question, actually more of a comment. I just want to say thanks to staff for putting this together. This is a real element of transparency of the recommendations and how they're kind of unfolding. And I think that's such a key part of the work that we have committed to as a board, and staff for doing their due diligence to be able to communicate back to the public, obviously, and give us an opportunity to do as board members when it comes up in terms of our discussions with the public. So much appreciated.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Ray? I'm not seeing any. Thanks ever so much, Mr. Ray. That takes us to 3 o'clock. Usually we would take a break at this point. We can go through reports if you wish, but does anyone have a preference, or we want to take a 10-minute break at this point? It seems to be. Let's do it now. Okay. Why wait for spring? Do it now. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll recess for 10 minutes. Okay, we are back in session, and that brings us to item 9.1.2, 9.1.2, and I think Mr. Hildebrand's going to speak to that initially, and then we're going to hear from Amanda Ellison.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to meet Amanda. Amanda's our general manager of people and communication. And I think she has introduced herself or had a chance to talk to a few of you. But it's also important that I think it's come up in the past with HR questions. And I think Director Elliott asked this last time, asked about this, how we're doing in HR. And so I thought the best person to be here to present this report would be Amanda. So I would like to pass it over to her to walk you through the details.
Thanks very much and welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Welcome. Appreciate everybody having me here today. So we're here today to look at a report that we prepared to seek the board approval for an additional full-time permanent leadership position in the finance department. I want to emphasize that this is a result of recent discussions that we've had to review capacity, structure, and succession planning within our finance team, which really highlighted a need to develop more capacity in this regard, as well as to support financial policy, engagement, and procedures. The finance department supports many of the key strategic priorities and initiatives across the TNRD, and much of that has expanded in the last several years. So we see the finance department continue to strain with their current capacity, and they have a lot of work to do ahead of them to do strategic work, process improvement work, engagement work with the public, as well as some of the work relating to the forensic audit. In the fall, the finance department did receive additional funding for one support position. So this was an entry-level support position, which has been really successful in alleviating some of the strain for the support staff and creating some more efficiency at that level. But we still feel it's a priority to be able to enhance our leadership team to help with some of the key strategic policy and process improvement work, which will better enable the team to be able to deal with increasing demands for their work at the site. This new position would be budgeted to cost between 123 and 134,000 per annum with benefits. It would be for the 2022 year available within contingency funds, and then would be taken from additional taxation dollars in future years. So that's our ask to the board, and we'd be happy for any questions that you have.
Director Elliott.
I just want to know if the payroll's going back under finance instead of with HR.
I don't anticipate so. That's not something we've reviewed or discussed.
Well, it seems to me like from the point of view as a director, that the payroll is almost impossible to understand because of what we have and what we are supposed to have and what we do have. And so if HR is going to keep it, then you need to redo the paperwork. And when I look at what's happening, we're going to talk about tomorrow, and I know this is coming a little soon, but when you look at all of us being different, I want to ask Doug why it is that he can't pull something for one director and not for another. Like they should be individual because we all get paid at a different rate, and we can't see that. Anyway, that's my rant for the day.
Much appreciated. I did hear from Chief Financial Officer Ray that there were some concerns about pay slips, and it is a project that we have underway to improve and add to the amount of pay codes, which would make your pay slips better able to understand. So I think there is a lot of ways we can improve that with the payroll team sitting with our HR group still.
Thank you, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Welcome. I guess there's kind of two philosophies around approving new items in a budget. One is you approve them all as a group in terms of a budget process, or you kind of do it out of sync with that. And so this is sort of out of sync, I suppose. And I understand the staff consider a real priority. The question would be for me, I guess, is what other things might be coming up in the budget that we would have to be looking at to spend more money on in terms of a tax increase or that kind of thing. So could staff Somebody give me some, maybe someone has hand up on that, yeah.
I can take that. Director Singh, there is no other positions coming in the budget. We thought it would be prudent to actually, this is a priority, as you mentioned, and it's something that we brought forward now as the budget will be coming forward in the near future, but there is no other positions being requested in the budget that you'll be seeing in the coming month.
Are there any other, not position, but any other implications to a tax increase in terms of other programs, things that the region wants to do in terms of new things?
No, we feel like we could cover this position off based on the finances we have in place now. And to Amanda's point, it would be then taxed in 2023.
Right. I mean, I guess, and that's sometimes how things happen, but I'm sort of wondering about kind of looking at the holistic budget as opposed to one-off things. And I prefer obviously typically look at the holistic budget, but I can support this today.
And that's normally how we would bring it. It's just, we thought it was prudent bringing, given the need for it.
Thank you. Director Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Ellison, for your report. I don't doubt that there's a lot to do arising out of the forensic audit, a lot of actions that will take time to develop. I'm wondering, however, if we have the research into how other regional district finance departments are structured, and if any thought has been considered on the fact that making these recommendations happen could just be short-term actions and not long-term actions. I'm having a hard time with this just because this is a new creation, which will eventually be covered by taxation, and because of recent events, I just don't know that the timing is right. So if you could respond to those questions, I'd appreciate it.
Ms. Ellison.
Yep, thank you, Director Sinclair. We've done some research at other RDs, but I wouldn't say I could quote you the structure of each RD in particular of their finance department. Most have the CFO, most have a deputy CFO, which was a gap that we have, but given our size, I don't think that was completely abnormal. Given, I think, the look at succession planning, this position becomes critical for the ongoing sustainability of our organization. And I think that ties into some of your kind of second questions, Director Sinclair, around short-term, long-term. It could be something we continue to evaluate in terms of the structure of the department.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak, Mr. Hildebrand?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gillis. I also just wanted to add, if I could, just the succession plan is really the most important part. We only have one manager in the finance department, that being Doug, and I can tell you he is overworked and overloaded with some of the workload that is being presented to him, and it's something that we've been looking at for a while. He said he's been talking for the last few years about this and never had an opportunity to bring this forward, and I thought it was important that we did at this time. So I believe the structure, back to your question about the structure, we have done some research, and I feel like we can make the structure work based on the complement that we're putting together.
Thanks, Mr. Hildebrand, and I can confirm that I'm aware that this has been under consideration for some considerable period of time. Director Laird, I have Director Laird, Director Schaefer, and Director O'Reilly at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What sort of timelines are you looking at getting this position filled?
We would love to start the recruitment process once it's approved. Typically, we'd have that kind of open for a few weeks, interviewing, hiring. So having a candidate in place, ideally in the next 2 to 3 months.
Thank you, Director Schaefer.
I'd just like to ask there, it says in your summary here that we, due to a recent support staff vacancy, are we replacing that vacancy on top of this, right?
Yes, we are. We had a QP support staff member resign, and we have that actively posted as well. And it's what led us to do some further review around succession planning and capacity in that team.
Thank you, Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. Just an observation and then a question. I think the finance team has done a phenomenal job over the last year navigating and doing the core jobs that they need to do for the regional district at the same time as going through a forensic audit. And time, a significant amount of time being allocated to that. I just wonder if we really know at this point in time what we need. I'm wondering if it's better to let the dust settle once this extra workload has been removed off the plate of Mr. Ray and the people in the finance department, and then chart a path forward. I just wonder if we're kind of just in the middle of this and maybe looking at that, coming up next year till we know exactly what we need. Do you have any comments towards that?
Thank you, Director O'Reilly. I do. I think the risk we need to consider is the current employee retention and engagement of our staff. So we do know that one of our resignations was due to workload and capacity within that team. So to continue at the level they've been continuing, I don't think is sustainable, and it risks then further losses and further potential unmet expectations from the public.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Director Laird again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing that I've struggled with over the last year when the finance department has been so heavily involved in doing the forensic audit, a lot of the requests that I've made for either financing or approval of financing for projects that are happening in our community are very slow going through because of the workload they had. And I don't think that's going to go away. So I know that the directors we don't have a staff like the municipal governments do. We rely strictly on the TNRD staff to do basically our approval for financing. And it's been lacking in the last year. So I think we're going the right way, and we definitely need to do the planning ahead for another CAO. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Laird. Are there any further questions? We have a recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Is there any further discussion on the recommendation? Everybody is ready to vote. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? Director Sinclair? That's the only one I see. As Director Sinclair is opposed. That's carried. Reappointments to the Board of Variance. There is a recommendation. One recommendation for two people.
Move the recommendation. Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? I think there was only one recommendation. Thank you. Okay, two stages. I'm sorry. Okay. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Appointments to the Agriculture Advisory Commission. There is a recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
I'd second that, Commissioner.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We have a recommendation with respect to the 2022 census results that they be accepted for information.
So moved.
Second. Moved, seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Swan.
Thank you. I just want to go on record as saying I don't agree with the numbers for Clinton. They're telling us we lost 11.4% of our population. And with the current housing crisis we have here and the number of new families in the community, I don't believe that. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. You're on record as having said it, Director Swan. Was Ms. Sadilkova, did you want to comment?
I wish to make one correction. Steve, my apologies. I got the number wrong for Spence's Bridge. It's not on page 3 of the report. It should read 76. Or pardon me, yeah, 76 and not 21. The percentage and the other numbers are correct. Those are in the designated places, and those are typically where we have a water service. And I know there was some questions about the numbers. So we do, on the Stats Canada website, it is a bit tricky to read because while some electoral areas, for example, B, there are no First Nations, other ones, for example, I, there's a lot of First Nations. So in your envelope, in your blue folder, just to clarify all this, we've done a 2021 just electoral areas, obviously not the municipalities. The numbers and percentages excluding IRIs or Indian reserves, and then one including. In terms of board makeup, once these numbers are certified by the province, another report will be coming to you if it has an impact on the makeup of the board. And I mean, some of the numbers are quite extreme, the changes. And I know that in terms of on Indian reserves, Electoral Eye has the most reserves, but also historically, there was a lack of census response on some of the reserves. This is across me. I don't know if it's across Canada, but certainly it was an issue with folks we've spoken to at Census Canada in British Columbia. But I think there's a lot more response to the census. The census is traditionally underreported compared to BC stats, which relies on things like your care card or your driver's license. The numbers are never perfect. But to our knowledge, the only error there was the Spence's Bridge. And
Apology accepted.
And we will, when we bring the regional growth strategy monitoring report, we will delve down in these numbers some more.
Thanks, Mr. Dilkup. Director Rothenberger.
Just wanted to note that the report shows exceptionally robust growth in Area P, so something must be going right there. We're now the largest population center, it looks like, in the TNRD outside the city of Kamloops, except that I don't believe those numbers. Because I know in 2016, we didn't have 3,600 people in the area. And that's somehow it was lagging behind. We've known that is not a correct number. So we did not grow by that amount at all. I think though the current number of 8,300 is probably much closer to the truth, would you say?
Sorry? Oh.
There, okay, now I can speak. So we did this as a follow-up. This is not in your agenda. Just the regular report is in your agenda. So we looked at whether these numbers are correct or not. These are the numbers from Stats Canada, and you see the percentage changes, and you see 2016 and 2021, including reserves. So if you look at the EAP, that number is huge, and there is a lot of growth at Sun Rivers as well. We did have a record building permitting last year. I know in electoral area J, for example, while Savannah, yeah, it had new construction, but it had less people as their primary residents, but Tobiano really pushed those numbers up. So there's a different story in each A, and I don't know the story in each electoral area. But this is what the numbers have given us. And then if you switch so this is excluding reserves in electoral area P, it's 4,000 and a bit. So if you don't believe it, I'm not sure what to do.
Director Rothenberger, then Director Schaefer.
Mr. Chair, the chart I'm looking at in the report appears to mix up the including the IRI and without, and they're side by side. So that I think that's the cause of the 2016 number versus the 2021. But what is it? It's still pretty good rate of growth there. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Schaefer.
I worked the census last year, and I found that these will be false because lots of people never answered the door day after day after day after day. So they weren't included in the census at all. There's lots of people not included. A lot of people refuse to do it too.
Thank you, Director Singh.
I'm not sure whether to give Director Rothenberg credit or blame Director Schaefer. I'm kind of confused as to what this whole census data is all about. But one of the things that's kind of interesting to me in this whole route to information is that our rural areas are now having growth again, which seems like it wasn't the case for many, many years. So it'd be interesting to understand when we get to the RGS about why that might be, or have some metrics as to, if we can, because are things we're doing working? Is broadband working? Is it's very interesting to me to see that happening, and it's great, but I don't know exactly what's driving it.
I think Director Singh that Director Rothenberg, he put his finger on it. It's good representation at the local government level that's driving this increase in the electoral areas. Director Roden.
Thank you. Director Swan, you'd be interested. I spoke with Dr. Lauster, who's in the Department of Sociology at UBC, and he makes something of a study of censuses. And he said we cannot disregard the 2021 census, but he said, of course, as we saw with Lytton, timing is everything. The 2021 census took place in May of 2021. And he said that it was the middle of the pandemic. So for him as a sociologist, he says he does not know if it is indicative of trends long-term. For example, we've heard about people realizing they can work from home anywhere with good Wi-Fi. So they are moving out of the big urban centers to some of the smaller communities where they have a perhaps kinder, more gentler way of life at less cost. So he said he certainly is not discounting the 2021 census, but he feels, in his opinion, it is not perhaps quite as indicative of trends and population patterns as in the past. So you are perhaps right to be wary of it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the recommendation? Director Rain?
Yeah, thank you. Just in response to Director Singh's question, if we could bring up the municipalities numbers, I think it's quite possible to say that the aspects that Director Roden was speaking about have certainly proven to be a factor in the Sun Peaks growth. I'm not sure if you can bring up.
Sorry, Director Rain, I only did because the questions were about the Indian Reserve population in or out of the electoral areas. They're typically in the electoral areas, not municipalities. But your Sun Peaks, the massive growth of 128%, it's on the last page of your report, all the municipalities. So everybody could perhaps go there.
I understand Director Roden has one further comment.
Thank you. Just to me, another interesting number, and it's not an incorporated municipality, but it is certainly a large community. Tobiano went from 170 to 410. That's a growth of 141%. So I'm just thinking, extrapolating from that and wondering how long it will be before Tobiano comes knocking on the door of incorporation. And if they do, will Savannah be far behind?
Thank you. Okay, I think that's the end of the discussion now. All in favor? Opposed, if any? See none opposed, that's carried. That takes us to 916, replacement committee member appointments for the Regional Solid Waste Plan Monitoring Advisory Committee. I understand this is a provincial requirement. Is that right, Mr. Hildebrand?
Yes, that is correct.
Move the recommendation.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Invasive plant outreach and education and outreach contract.
Move the recommendation.
It's moved, seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? If none opposed, that's carried. Monte Creek and Lafarge Fire Protection Service Establishment. There are two recommendations. By golly, there are three. Yeah.
Second recommendation one.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Director Elliott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this your area?
Pardon?
Is this your area?
It is indeed.
And when you get to as far as the Lafarge plant, is that including the wildlife park?
No, but it's also not just my area. It's also, this will also affect Director Rothenberger's area.
Yes, I understand that, but he's on the other side of the river.
Correct.
Yes, no, I just was more concerned about the wildlife park. But it must be in the city then.
The wildlife park is in the city, is it not?
I don't know. I'm asking.
It certainly is. Yeah, so it will not affect the wildlife park.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any further discussion on recommendation one? All in favor? Anyone opposed? I don't see any opposed. That's carried.
Move to.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on recommendation two? I see no hands. All in favor? Opposed, if any?
Move three.
Carried. Number three. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Canada Community Building Fund, Smith Pioneer Park. There is a couple of recommendations. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. The second recommendation? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, fair enough. Building permit activity report
I'll move
January.
that. Over here.
Director Watson.
The Thompson-Nicola Regional District Building Inspection Services locations and everything like that, it has 2021 January compared to 2021 January. We may have a typo.
That's my. Thank you for catching that. We will make sure we catch that next time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I don't know my phone. Audit Committee Director Rain.
Yeah, we've had no meeting in the last little while. We will be meeting in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Economic Development Director Roden.
No meeting, no report.
Electoral Area Directors Director Kershaw.
No meeting, no report.
Emergency Management and Protection Director Watson.
Really look forward to meeting with the now permanent BC wildfire people.
Policy Review Director Sinclair. There are several recommendations.
Yes, there are. I'd like to move recommendation one.
Second.
Is there any discussion? I have a note here to ask Director Sinclair to explain. Does it require an explanation?
I'm happy to answer questions or direct to General Manager Campbell if there are any questions.
Okay. Don't seem to be any, Director Sinclair, so moved and seconded, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried and
Move recommendation 2.
Second.
moved and seconded. Is there any discussion, Director Singh?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was trying to understand what the actual implication of the change to section 57 process is, and I failed. So could someone help me understand what the actual changes are for here?
Can you help with that, Ms. Adelphia?
I can give it my best shot. So about 12 years ago, the board passed so it was 2010, there was a policy that was quite a bit more aggressive about the extent of legal action that we would take. And we've been so busy, honestly, we've been short-staffed in building and overwhelmed with applications, and it's really hard province-wide, I would say, or certainly in our greater area, to get and keep qualified building inspectors. So our priority has been issuing permits and reviewing legitimate applications. So with this, the change in the policy moves the, how would I put it, the discretion to where and how we enforce and go to court. So for example, the Psalm 23 Society this morning, under the policy, we'd be in court immediately on that. So you will see each of the section 57 reports that we draft, we analyze them, you know, is how safe and unsafe, what is the measure of risk, do we need to post a do not occupy if they're truly that dangerous? It allows for some discretion and acknowledges the limits of staff time, because having a policy, it came to light with a recent court case. It came to light that it is MIA recommended to us, do not have a policy that you cannot follow. So yeah, this policy is a little more watered down. It acknowledges limits and resources and acknowledges the discretion of, say, the CAO or myself based on budgets as well. Because otherwise we would be, the legal budget for enforcement would have to triple.
So was part of this also moving from a staff kind of approval model versus to a qualified professional model with a stamp from an engineer? Is that what I'm
That's
also-
always been in
Oh, it's always
place.
been in place.
But
Okay.
what's happened is last year, the property market was so busy and hot. We did a record number of BIRs, and we had a lot of notices come off title in the last few years. And they take a lot of time to take off title too. So with the second policy that was recommended by MIA, and it sort of spells out what we're doing, and we've created a special form, and to just find a faster way to communicate to, often it'll be executors or other folks, say a bank comes into ownership of a property, what they need to do to get the notice off title.
Are the fees high enough to cover the staff's time for this? Because it's really
No.
staff driven. So I mean, is that part of the policy, is how much we're charging for these things? Because it seems to me if someone's contravened regional district bylaws, they should pay full cost. There shouldn't be a substitute for taxpayer for us to have to either put it on or take it off.
That's a longer conversation.
Okay.
Our fees cover really just our land title costs, the cost to put the notice on and take the notice off. They're $200. But it's not about the fee. It's about the money or the process that the owner of the land goes through to deal with after the fact review of construction. Really, that's not cheap.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? No one's opposed, that's carried.
Move recommendation 3.
Second.
Moved and seconded, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? There's no one opposed.
And finally, move recommendation 4.
Thanks, Director Sinclair. Is there any discussion? See none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That takes us to Regional Solid Waste Management Committee, Director Schaefer.
No meeting, no report.
Invasive Plant Committee, Director Kershaw.
No meeting, next meeting, March 9th.
Thank you. Thompson Regional Hospital District, Director Christian.
Next meeting is March 24th.
Thank you. Utilities Committee, Systems Committee, Director Elliott. Thompson Headwater Services, Director Quinn.
Receive the minutes for information.
All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Wells Gray Country Services, Director Schaefer.
I'd like to receive the minutes for info, and I would also like to move the recommendation that Bob V. Stack be appointed to the Wells Gray Country Services Committee for a 2-year term ending December the 31st, 2023.
Seconded.
Thank you. Do I need to treat that as two separate ones, Ms. Campbell, or can I just treat that as one? Receive the minutes and confirm the appointment.
You could read that as one, Chair Gillis.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? Carried. Joint Services Committee, Director Schaefer.
No meeting.
External Committees, Fraser Basin Council, Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. We had operations committee meetings on the 9th and 10th of February and discussed Old Grove, UNDRIP, and Lytton, among other things, and we'll be bringing some recommendations to the full board. Thank you.
Thank you. Municipal Finance, Director O'Reilly.
No meeting, no report.
Municipal Insurance Association, Director Duty.
No meeting, but I would like to let the board know that I have registered for the Risk Management Conference, which takes place in April, and I'm looking very forward to attending.
Thank you. Shuswap Watershed Council, Director Crow.
Next meeting, March the 9th.
Thank you. Airport Society, Director Roden.
Next meeting, March 10th.
Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Yeah, we're actually in the middle of FCM board meetings right now. They were meant to be in Windsor, Ontario, but they went virtual because of COVID. And I really want to express huge thanks to very valued colleagues, my dear friends, Mayor Polderman, Director Polderman from Lytton, and Director Rice from Blue Sky Country. They presented yesterday to the committee I chair at FCM, which is the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee. And there was concern that we were actually re-traumatizing folks who have been through such a crazy thing, but they really did give the committee, which is across the country, an amazing insight into the issues that they faced with the disasters that they've faced, and also reflections on how to best recover and what's worked well and what hasn't worked so well. So that committee was extremely appreciative to have the insight from our region. Also want to thank those who emailed comments, the chair and others who've done that as well. I'll share that again at the FCM board meeting, which is next Thursday, I believe, for the full board. And I'll have a report for the for TNRD after those meetings are over. But you know, the work that both Director Polderman, Director Rice, and others around this table have done, not only on the ground in terms of emergencies, but also sharing their reflections across the country so we can do better advocacy to the federal government. It's just so deeply appreciated. So I wanted to say thanks to them very, very much.
Thank you, Director Singh. Community Energy Association, Director Blackwell.
Yeah, we actually had a workshop about a week and a half ago. Myself and Director Singh attended virtually. The main theme of it was rolling electric car charging systems across the province, where to plan them, who would be involved, the costs, the various types of EVs, and sort of a general group discussion on how to make the future happen over the next couple of years. And I'm going to try to get the slide deck from that presentation and include that for directors at the next meeting.
Thanks, Director Blackwell. That takes us to correspondence action. Requested letter of support for the Kamloops Music Collective.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? It's carried. And we're requested to provide a letter of support for the Kamloops Republic Chief and Council.
Second.
Any discussion? Director Rothenberger?
Just a question. I wanted to ask this at our meeting with the band, but it didn't get a chance because we were very tight for time. Is there a proposal now, and this is what I'm reading from their request, that for an overpass at East Shuswap and Yellowhead Highway? Is that part of what they're asking for, or am I just?
Not to my knowledge, but perhaps Mr. Hildebrand could help me there.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. It's not that I'm aware of. My understanding is just road improvements on East Shuswap Road is what we're supporting, or what we'd like to get support for.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Information only. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Received for information. Any discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. New business from members. Director Rothenberger.
Mr. Chair, a couple of weeks ago, I posted a comment on my blogs expressing concern about the direction this board was going and suggesting, and in reference to the division that has come up within the board, and suggesting that we had a serious decision to make. That was either that we can move forward and get our act together and do the job we need to do, or we could continue working towards becoming dysfunctional. And I was optimistic that we were going to head in the right direction at that time. I also stated in that piece that I was not among those who were suggesting that you should consider resigning, because I felt it wouldn't serve any purpose, and that you should carry on in that position. But since that time, a number of things have happened. The reason that I stood with you was that I knew that the dilemma that you were in with the whistleblower letter, and I felt you handled it appropriately, because it was clear that that letter was submitted to you for your eyes only, and that you were not to share it with the board at that time. And I was very pleased when we were able to then release that fact to the public, because I thought it was important for them to know. But upon that release, there have been a number of things, as I say, relating to your interaction with the media. And been a number of things over the past several days, culminating, I think, with your recent interview with Kamloops this week. And I hate to say it, but I think you've put this board in a very difficult position. You have wandered again into the area of discussions at in-camera meetings on confidential matters, and the board can't respond to that, because we can't do that. We can't go there. I think what has been set up is that the division is being perpetuated, and you've even inflamed that. And this, it breaks my heart. I was kind of up all night, so I'm tired. But I would ask, Mr. Chair, that you reconsider your decision to serve out the rest of your term as chair. It's not a numbers game in the sense that we're not looking for a threshold of the number of directors who feel that way. And after we reach a certain number, that's when you should make that decision. It has to be made based on what's best for the board, what's best for the people that we serve, and what's best for the TNRD. That's a decision that's up to you. I'm not aware of any means that the board could fire you. Vote non-confidence or whatever. It's going to be up to you. So you have to decide that. I'm saying this today because I feel I have to, because I think that's what's best. And I would like to see us get back to work. And so I think that's a choice that you have to make. And I ask you sincerely to please consider.
I will consider your thoughts and comments, Director Rothenberger, and I can tell you that I will consider it in view of what is best for the board and what is best for the regional district. And I've always conducted myself in a manner that I considered to be putting the regional district first and foremost in everything that I did and in every decision that I made. But I will consider your comments. Is there any other new business from Director Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I watched the events of the last month or so in Ottawa and Windsor and Coots and Surrey, the Pacific border crossing, where the police have removed protesters from blocking the road and hurting economies. The federal government introduced, or the Prime Minister declared, the Emergencies Act, which is a really strong act over civil liberties. So the question that I've tried to ask many times, and the board has supported it, is what about Blue River and its protesters? I have written a letter to Mr. Farnsworth and the Premier. I'll make it available, a copy in the next agenda, asking them for an action plan to remove the group in Blue River and the camp and have a 30-day action plan. I have no idea what the response to that will be. It went out, I think, on Monday or Tuesday, or maybe last Friday. And I will make a copy of that available to yourself. And we're going to wait and see. And it has become very apparent that there is a very different set of laws for urban areas and a very different set of laws for rural areas. And the concern is, yes, the Ambassador Bridge cost the economy a lot of money. It cost people jobs, same as the one at Surrey and the same as the one at Coots. But what about our little businesses who've been suffering for 3 years? So I'm certainly hoping that the province will make some efforts to resolve this situation so it stops. And I just want to let you know that I have written that letter, and I will make a copy available, and I think staff will put it in the next agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Quinn. Is there any further new business from directors? I'm seeing no hands. So that will take us to a notice of motion, and I understand Director Blackwell is going to introduce a notice of motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the last few months, as many others here have been contemplating what we need to do here, it's my feeling that we need to signal a move forward in a decisive way. We've done that with the recommendations from the audit report, but I think we as a board need to accept our role in what has happened in the supervision and the administration of the past CAO, and the consequences and the costs of that. The TNRD board is an ongoing entity. We go through civic elections and board appointments, but the business of the board and the representation of the board continues past those things. So it's not like every 4 years or 3 years, we have a new set of seats here. Some of us come, some of us go. That's how it works. And because of that, we are responsible for the actions of the organization, and especially the board, for time as long as it goes back that this board has existed. And because of that, the buck needs to stop with the board. The ultimate apology is with us. It doesn't matter how long we've been here, one term or 20, it just doesn't matter. We are responsible as a board, much as other levels of government are responsible to the people of Canada, people of British Columbia, etc. So I'm hoping that the board will support this motion coming forward soon. That whereas recent events have brought to light a previous lack of accountability and board oversight of the TNRD leadership, and whereas the board has one employee, the CAO, and the actions of the CAO are a responsibility of the board to monitor and to ensure the CAO is held to a high ethical standard. Let me get my page up here. And whereas the former and current board had a duty to protect and serve the citizens we represent and maintain their trust in our governance, and any breaches of that trust ultimately rest with the board. Therefore, be it resolved that the TNRD Board of Directors issues a formal apology to current and former TNRD staff and all citizens of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, and a public commitment to earning their trust back through strong oversight and good governance going forward. And that is my notice of motion.
I'll second that.
And that was that, is that to come forward at a future meeting, as I understand it?
That's
Is that
correct.
correct?
It'll be on the next March agenda.
Okay,
for discussion and debate.
I would simply ask Ms. Campbell that the term breach of trust be looked at very carefully in that notice of motion. That's all. Otherwise, I have nothing to say about it. But I don't think it has to be voted on at this point, does it? It didn't have to be seconded, as I understand it. It's just a notice that's coming forward, correct? Okay, that brings us to question period. Are there any members of the public who have questions for the board? None? And that then will bring us to our closed meeting, and we'll require a motion to go into close.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that over here.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? We're in closed session, then we'll take 5 minutes and then move into closed.